This is me thinking about what actual play can be.
Pride and Prejudice and zombies.
You're getting closer. You're getting warmer. But no, got wetted. That font of accurate information. Oh, right. This is happening all the time.
We are doing a podcast on company time.
How does that work? You don't have to be the greatest dungeon master if there's no dungeon master needed at the table.
And we are back with yet another episode. This is your humbly favorite host, Anorak,
Shut up,
Raghav, as he's known in the... When I said we would go with the flow, this is not what I meant.
I'm breaking the flow right now.
This is your favorite host, Raghav, with your second favorite host, Amaan. Or Amaan, as he's known in the...
Amaan or Amaan.
What kind of favorite host keeps just the same name?
Hey, it's the brand. The name is Amaan. The brand is Amaan.
We are here for the letter F for the with Emily Friedman. It's Friedman, right?
Yes.
Thank you. I should have asked that before we started recording, but
but yeah, Emily is a published author with works in Polygon and a critic. And I found her through Twitter, of all places, where I found a lot of people. And we are so glad to have you, Emily, on our podcast, finally.
Happy to be here. And thank you for the kind of accommodating the fact that we are literally half a world away. So it is noon here.
Absolutely.
Well, even though you're half a world away, we are just, the thing is, our work is also half the world away.
Exactly.
Also true.
This is our work time.
Yeah, this is when we work. We are on the clock. While we are doing a podcast on company time.
Nice. We love to see it. I am an academic, which means there's no time that is not work in some way, shape, or form. This is the danger of the job.
Oh, hats off to you for that, first of all. I can totally understand academic being... at one point, I was supposed to go into academia, but I chose not to. I was like, I would rather go into the production side and the film side of it. Sometimes I miss it. Sometimes I really don't miss it. I do not envy you, but the work you have been doing for whatever work I have been seeing that you have done, covering various different topics across the TTRPG space, it's been amazing. But we would like to start off by...
Amaan is literally representing true neutral alignment at this point. He's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Hey, I'm everywhere.
Sure. That's not true neutral. Anyways, Emily, so to our listeners, why don't you just tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. I am officially an associate professor of English at Auburn University, which is a state university in the state of Alabama in the deep American South. I am originally from Texas, which my students would tell you is not the deep American South, although most other folks would. And I've kind of bopped all over. My training is as a scholar of 18th century British literature and culture. I worked on endings and smell, among other things, before I found myself really interested in the ways in which people make art outside of mass capital logics, which meant that I was working for a number of years on never published fiction that was written and circulated by hand in Anglophone literature. And in 2020, an interesting thing happened, and we all suddenly found ourselves not able to access archives and collections and things like that. So I took a stab at writing about actual play, the performance of role-playing games. And it took off. And even though the archives have mostly reopened, I have spent the last 5 years and more becoming what I think at the moment we can call the most senior academic working on actual play. I'm not the only one. I'm just the oldest one. So I'm at work taking time out today from my work writing a book on actual play, and also have some work in the pipeline for some other book projects and things like that. And fresh off the plane back from the largest D&D game ever played for a live audience in New York City's Madison Square
Yeah.
Garden, which
Oh, yes.
I'm
We saw
almost over.
those.
It was
I've
very
seen that.
cool. So yeah, so it's been an interesting pathway, and I've spent a lot of time talking to tabletop performers and content creators, but also designers. Both obviously, a lot of this work takes place in North America and in Western Europe, but also I've gotten the chance to talk to folks who are making and creating kind of all over the world. Which is the cool thing to me about actual play is that it's starting to ebb and contract a little bit in North America,
Mm.
but it's exploding and growing in all of these other contexts, which I think is really neat. So yeah, that's part of my deal. That's the part of my deal that fits in a pretty small nugget.
Got it.
So your introduction into TTRPGs was in 2020, right? So,
No, so I've been a player of TTRPGs since I was, a teenager, and I will fully admit to my age when I say that like that was when Dungeons and Dragons was not the most popular TTRPG. It was
Mm.
the moment of the World of Darkness and
oh,
in Texas, Steve Jackson games. Um, and so I came uh, into D&D uh, right around the time of the start of 5th edition. In fact, my home game here, a few years ago, we looked it up because none of us could quite remember when we started playing, but we started playing the same week that Critical Role started streaming on Twitch in a kind of weird, eerie parallel. My first published work on actual play started from a call for papers that was issued in 2018. And academic time being what it is, it wasn't published until 2020, 2021. And then I started teaching TTRPGs in the college classroom in the fall of 2021 when we returned from our time of remote instruction and we're coming back into the classroom. And I've done that every fall ever since.
I've seen that one YouTube video of yours where you talk about the games that you actually take to students when you're talking about actual plays or TTRPGs in general. And some of those games are so good. Some of those games I haven't had a chance to take a look at yet. Uh, like there is a game about, I think it's called Dialect.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not
Yeah, it's yeah, the subtitle of the game is a game about language and how it dies. And you play it in 3 phases, basically adding on ways in which you're creating what the game calls an isolation, which is to say, why is this group of people separated from their larger community and creating their own community that would have a chance and a reason to make new language, right? So, like, you're early colonists on Mars, or you're a group of formerly enslaved people who have taken over the island where you've been imprisoned, and now you get the chance to build your own community, those sorts of things. And then the game ends when the isolation ends. So you're playing through the kind of growth and development of the language, and then the ways in which those words or phrases or ideas are no longer needed because the isolation is over. So it's a really interesting exercise. It's kind of in between. Um, you play it in a session. You can get a really interesting experience. Those are really great games for my purposes. We're not doing a whole bunch of campaigns in the college classroom. Students are adopting games to play outside of class to get that feel, but
Mhm.
love a game that can be run in 1, 2 class sessions, maybe 3 or 4 if it's really worth it.
Uh, Go
So
ahead.
I actually always had this question because I've seen this one movie. I know the Tolkien biopic, Nicholas Holt. I think
Yeah.
he says it in that one, right? A language without meaning is just a bunch of sounds.
Yeah. And what I love about dialect is because it's like a linguistics nerd game, it actually has like suggestions in the middle of the book. If you're not a language nerd already, here's how you can transform words, either by bringing in words from other languages that or by, mashing things up together. But like literally, here's how language often evolves. So it's super cool to kind of learn a little bit about like that kind of linguistic shift and drift along the way. But yeah, it is a kind of melancholy game precisely because it's like, oh, right, this is happening all the time. Words are transforming and that's exciting and generative, but also words fall out of use because we don't need them anymore or no one's there to remember them. And of course, whole languages that happens too.
Could you
Oh yeah.
just give us a like tiny preview on how language actually evolves? I'm that's my curiosity, just asking all of this.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. So, we see it all the time, right? At the American Linguistics Association, they kind of coin like they name words like word of the year, like,
Mhm.
and sometimes it's um uh so for example, Oxford University Press's word of the year for 2024 wasn't a word, it was a phrase, it was brain rot, right? And we've had those words for a long time, right? But putting them together to this new meaning, to kind of indicate something about our relationship to the internet or online content or just like the state of the world. Um, that's one of those ways in which you take two words, you put them together, all of a sudden you've got a new concept. I think it was Riz the year before.
Yeah.
Oh,
Um, the American Dialect Society decided this year that raw dog was the word of the year. Again,
Wow.
a word that has existed before,
Mhm.
and has had a very specific meaning. And what the American Dialect Society was noting was that it has drifted to have more meanings, kind of like a snowball. It's not just about, particular methods of sex. It's also about like just, kind of ways of being in the world more generally. But yeah, and it's super interesting, right? Because like a lot of different countries and societies like do this, like, and I look at like I remember, I think it was the Australian like version of this, and some of those words, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I get that. Like, I can see how you got there. And then I look on a different year, and it's like, oh, that has not entered the American lexicon, in a way that has reached me just yet. And maybe it will, and maybe it won't, right? Because this is the thing, right? We are all speaking the same language, but even as someone from Texas, there are states in just the United States that won't understand specific words that I'm using, in context, to say nothing of the ways in which English, we have many Englishes, as I often try to remember to teach my students, which I think is really interesting. I love
And
games that can do that.
so I have another channel called Products of Thought, and I interviewed a friend of mine who is a design educator here in India, and he actually introduced Dungeons and Dragons as a way to teach design to his students when it
Mm.
came to thinking about the character, thinking about the kind of world building that Dungeons and Dragons encourages, etc. And he has actually done a campaign where he had 68 of his students as players, and it was obviously different parties, and all of them were kind of in a West March. So one party doing something was affecting the other one, and it was not part of their thesis, but a part of their learning curriculum, per
Mhm.
se. So how do you approach when uh, when talking about TTRPGs to your students? Because like you said, you come from talking about 18th century English literature.
Yeah.
How does that
So I
factor
teach
in?
a couple. How does that work? Well,
Yeah.
so I'm among other things, I'm trained as a narratologist and a book historian. And so a narratologist thinks about the structure of the stories we tell in all different kinds of mediums. And book historians are really interested with all the different physical moves and intellectual moves that go into making a text, right? Because books don't just beam from brain to brain, they're written down and then they're composed in type and they're printed or they're put in an ebook and there's editors and layout and there's a whole circulation flow of human beings who are involved in that production. So a lot of what I'm interested in is kind of those ways in which things are made, not quite design thinking in the way that many of my colleagues who are game designers or teaching that kind of design thinking, but thinking about the physical object and how people are encountering it is part of it. When I'm teaching a truly 18th century course, uh, what I'm usually doing is pulling together games that are reflecting on the 18th century. Um,
Okay.
and so if we're just thinking about role playing games, then we're thinking about things like Teeth, like Good Society, like Regency Cthulhu. In fact, Dialect has scenarios that are inspired by the 18th century. And so putting those kinds of games together and thinking about pairing them with primary documents and primary literature from the period to think about, like, how is revising working, how
Mm.
are we kind of how are our cultural understandings of the period changing over time. For example, in my British literature class, because that's one of my service classes, I teach from 1789 to the present. I will expand out from just analog and tabletop games to there's an unfinished game by a set of Dutch developers called Herald, which imagines an alternate universe where Cromwell and the kind of Protestant protectorate of the British Empire never fell, and instead, like, conquered even more stuff. So the United States never becomes the United States. It's also a colony, and you have a protagonist who is um, of Indian descent, as in your India, not uh, how some North
Native
Americans use
American.
that word. Yes, exactly. Not an indigenous person in that sense, but born in London and who is traveling backwards on a ship journey in this kind of uh, group of people who are colonized people from kind of all over this mega British Empire, and thinking about identity and stuff like that. It's a really weird game, especially because all the designers are Dutch. So why they thought this was their story to tell and what they're getting out of it, I have many
Mm.
questions. That's kind of what I love about teaching games is I don't gamify things.
Mm.
Games aren't instruments for me. They're objects of cultural analysis where we can be like, oh, if something's real broken and real kind of, to use a technical term, fucky, um,
Mm.
then that's all the more interesting, right? Because you can be like, oh, well, why was that choice made? Because that feels real weird. And think about what are other ways you could do this. It's also how I think about, to the extent that I teach Dungeons and Dragons, I teach the documentation that has been created for classrooms, because many of my students are future teachers. And so we look at the materials that Wizards of the Coast made for classroom use for D&D, and they're terrible. They're very difficult to, like, make photocopies of or print in a way that makes them legible and not very expensive, because they're like full color, super elaborate, and they're a grayscale nightmare. And they are not, like, tight and elegant. And so that's the perfect kind of object to put in front of a student because they can rip it apart and figure out how to make it better in interesting kinds of ways. So yeah, so it kind of goes in different sorts of ways depending on the cohort of the class, but it really is often kind of the first third of the term is here's some basic ideas of game studies and design principles and narratology and things like that. Then we kind of go to, hey, here's some potential topics we can explore. What are people interested in? And then they get to create their own projects at the end, which is the most exciting part because they're small enough classes, generally speaking, that I can kind of let them go to where their excitement is. So some of them are design people, some of them are thinking about it in terms of teaching, some of them are creative writers, and all of them have a way into this kind of really rich body of work.
I
So
did not know that there was something by WotC for the classrooms. Even though it might be
Wizards
fucky,
of the
I
Coast is
would like to check it
tiny.
out.
You can find it on their website. It's very,
Mm.
because it's freely available, because Wizards of
Mhm.
the Coast, especially here in the US, has donated an enormous number of like introductory box sets to public libraries, as well as after school programs, as well as these materials that are designed to teach this so-called STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math to students. But of course, it's very clearly like the idea being if this is your if D&D is your first tabletop game, you'll probably get stuck there. And this is, something that, Thomas Manuel and Quentin Smith and I have talked a lot about in terms of how do you unstick the D&D player who doesn't who imagines all TTRPGs through the framework of the heavy crunch, the kind of challenge of onboarding, the length of a campaign, all those sorts of things, which are not true of most TTRPGs,
Mhm.
but when
Yeah,
that's your
that's the impression.
yardstick.
Yeah. And also, I don't know if you have heard about these people or this actual play called Damsels in Distress.
I have,
So,
yeah.
so when you talked about 18th century literature, that's with Dungeons and Dragons. That's where my mind like immediately went to like imagining Bridgerton or Downton Abbey, but in a D&D setting. That's where my mind immediately went to.
No, it's true. I mean, it's been so interesting to see kind of especially post Bridgerton. I mean, I'm a Jane Austen scholar by
Mhm.
training. Like my summer is very weird this year because we're just finishing up the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons. We're just going into Chaosium's 50th anniversary. It's also Jane Austen's 250th birthday, which is like, and so I'll be in the UK kind of in all of those headspaces at once for a lot of the summer, thinking about Austen games in particular, which have now become like Bridgerton games, which is like an
Mhm.
even and so for me, what's really fascinating is like there's so many Austen games and so few of them really capture what Austen gives me. But man,
Mhm.
they'll let you be Bridgerton all 8 days a week.
Oh yeah. uh,
yeah, the only Austen content I don't even think it's Austen content. The only thing relatively close to Austen content that I ever consumed was this one movie, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies.
Yes.
oh yeah.
There
I
was
actually
there
like
was
that
supposed
a
to
lot.
be a real there was supposed to be a full wave of like Jane Austen goes sci-fi slash horror, and it didn't pop off as much as it really could have in the wake of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, because there's a whole book series like it's Mansfield
Yeah.
Park and Mummies. I do not recommend these necessarily, but I there's something to be said for that as opposed to some of the other kinds of adaptations we've seen. I was once given a book in the series that is Jane Austen takes the South. I, again, do not recommend these books, but they are set in the American South in the modern day. But there's inevitably a reenactor, like a Civil War reenactor. So it's very weird in terms of imagined history and race and all kinds of stuff. And it's like, oh God, and you're trying to be a fluffy Jane Austen rewrite, and this is not working for me. Sorry, guys. But yeah, people really want to, you've got simulationist folks who really want to live in a kind of Jane Austen world, whatever that means. And what that means is, fluffy Regency romance. For me, one of my favorite things last summer was there's there's an old TTRPG Kagamatsu, and there was a hack of it that was done for a convention called A Single Man in Possession of Good Fortune. And the mechanic is a female identified person is always the GM. And she is playing the single man with a very large GM screen because her roles and her notes absolutely cannot be seen. And the rest of the table is is a family unit trying to get one of them to get the single man to marry them, to save their family, right? This is kind of the setup of Pride and Prejudice, basically. And so you're doing these contested roles, and you're not doing it. And the hardest thing that we had to realize when we were playing was, oh, we're not trying to do things. We're trying to get the single man to do things to us, to say nice things to us, to give us a kiss, to give us a promise. We're totally passive. And so we're rolling these contested roles, and we know if we win the role, but what we don't know is whether we won with love or pity. And so you can win the game, but have an unhappy ending if you win with pity instead of love. And you don't know until the very end. And that's Jane Austen to me, far more than any other game that is trying to do that kind of work. Give me the dark, like marriage is scary and a gamble and all those sorts of things. And women don't have power. But nobody's playing Good Society for that story.
Another cross section with like 19th century and D&D. Well, it's not technically, but I love this poem. It's The Goblin Market by Christina
Yes.
Puzzetti. So I did my undergrad in English literature, and this was one of the poems that was taught to us, and we had to like do a lot of writing on it. So this was like one of my literal like favorite poems to read about, because of not just the imagery but the exploration of themes and everything, which was amazing. And I'm actually thinking of doing something similar, but not in a Jane Austen-y way, because I don't think I can do it justice. But definitely trying to explore some themes that were presented there.
That is a really interesting poem, especially like in it's so much sensory detail,
Yeah,
right?
it is so
That's
much.
in that poem. So yeah, it's wild. But yeah, I think that's really interesting.
When you talked about that one book with the Indian character written by the Dutch, it
Yeah,
reminded me
yeah,
of
the
this
video game
one
Herald. Yeah.
TTRPG. I think Aman
Dude.
knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, of course I know what you're talking about. uh,
Oh boy.
One D&D setting released by this one person
OSR
called the
setting, RPG Pundit.
RPG Pandit called the Arrows of Indra, who
Mm.
an American who wrote an Indian D&D setting and made it the most racist thing possible.
Yeah, it's just,
Guy talked
man, do
about
we
non-touchability.
no, it's
Cast
so
is, yeah.
it's such a mess. I beat my head against the wall so many times. I'm trying to remember. I want to say it was Grant Howitt who abandoned a setting before settling down on the setting for Hollows. I remember like he was like, "Oh, this is not our story to tell." And like, could more of us do that, please, and thank you, right? Like, and the worst is when you get like the kind of the fig leaf that is the consultant brought in at the end. It's like, no, 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 no. That's not. You're getting closer. You're getting warmer, but no,
But no.
but no, that's not how this goes.
Before we jump into another thing that Anurag is, pointing me towards, one of your books that you're currently writing, it's called, correct me if I'm wrong, Improvised Worlds.
The point of the book is the same. The title is a constantly shifting creature, but we're working on the title at the moment is How Stories Are Played. And we'll see. Again, this is one of those things where it's like, peer review is a beautiful thing. They might recommend that the title is something different. This is the tricky part of talking about actual play, is like no one knows what that is, so you can't use it as like the keyword. So the full title, because academic books have to have a colon, is How Actual Play Performances Reimagine Creative Ownership, Authenticity, and Genre. So the hope is that it's the first book, the first single authored book on actual play, because basically there's so many people around who want to write about actual play, especially people who are junior colleagues, and every time they have to go to their supervisor or somebody who's trying to give them money or things like that and explain what it is and not be able to like point to much in the way of scholarship, at least in terms of like a single book or that kind of thing. There's just not been that much coverage yet of actual play, especially actual play that is not just Dungeons and Dragons, not just kind of the 3 or 4 shows that are produced in North America that people have widely heard of. So
And
that's what I'm trying to fill in some of those gaps.
And I jumped to that because you mentioned Grant Howard, and I think in one of his tweets, which like blew up on Twitter, he mentioned like actual play to TTRPGs is like pornography to actual.
Yeah, and Quinn's repeated it on Shut Up and Sit Down in his How to Get Into TTRPGs.
I haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah, well, I gave a keynote at Generation Analog last summer. Quinn's is a friend of mine, and so I feel like I can pick on him a little bit. But and he's changed. I mean, and he is now creating actual play, and I think he has changed his tune a little bit. I can't speak for him entirely, but one of the things that I have friends who actually study the history of pornography. This is the great thing about being an 18th centuryist. And so, and thinking very seriously about, what that form is and does and how it's treated and all those sorts of things. And I think, well, first of all, I think one of the challenges about actual play is that there's so many different ways that it can be produced. Like, I think people have a lot of anxiety about the so-called Matt Mercer effect, right? The idea that like Critical Role is going to impact your tables in ways that are negative. And as somebody who's played and that actual play is inherently responsible for that. And as someone who has played with a fair number of, people who record a lot of actual play, I think that it's more nuanced than that, right? First of all, theater kids are always going to play like theater kids, whether there's a camera or a microphone in front of them or not. That's a style of play. That's a culture of play. Is it overwhelmingly like represented in actual play right now? Yes. Has it always been? No. Does it have to be? No. Right? There's lots of different, like, I hope, maybe it's a hope more than I think, because I often say I try to describe and not predict what's coming down the pike. But I think all the survey data I've done over the last couple of years suggests to me that a lot of people are dipping into actual play to learn systems, to see how they're played. And we're not doing a super great job of that kind of pedagogical work. And if folks can do that, if we get some good teachers in the mix, in addition to being people that we like to watch to play, then I think that we would see an increasing change. But because but that's the tricky part, is like we don't know fully why folks pick up actual play. And I think there's lots of different reasons. But yeah, and I think that like the idea that there's this, there's these legions of hundreds of thousands of people who like watch actual play and then come to their tables and are sad, I'm not convinced by. I haven't seen enough of a critical mass, so to speak, of evidence of that.
Mm-hmm.
In part because a lot of people who watch actual play already are playing.
That's true.
So, I mean, and I also think that people are not idiots, right? Like we know the difference between what we see on a screen versus like I don't hold my home game, which is full of nerdy historians who like to play tactical D&D, to the standard that I would hold, my theater kid friends, whether I'm watching them on screen or playing with them in a completely different game. I don't know. I get
There is,
itchy
however,
for an analogy.
I mean, there is, however, like a odd case where people watch an actual play and then have a certain expectation when they go to a game, like, hey, this is going to be like how I watched it. I mean, like, we have both, Anurag and I have both read like a few horror stories on Reddit regarding that. I mean,
Got Reddit, that font of accurate information. But no, I mean, I've seen those. I've seen those. I've seen those RPG horror stories, and I've heard. I mean, there are some really interesting things. Like apparently, among players in Saudi Arabia, for example, like it's not the Matthew Mercer effect, it's the Laura Bailey effect. The number of like little adorable jester like tieflings plucked right out of Critical Role that show up at tables is non-zero. But I think that's different than, I think we're all inspired by the media we consume. Show me somebody who
true.
at my home game, my friend who's an aviation historian who I love very much, all his characters are Legolas. And so what's the difference between I'm pulling my inspiration from Lord of the Rings in the time-honored, decades-old tradition versus I'm pulling my inspiration for my character from something I watched on an actual play? I don't think those are different. And that doesn't necessarily mean that your play style is going to be distinct. But again, we just don't know, aside from like anecdata and dungeon masters who are anxious, which understandable, right? But yeah, I've played with dozens of people and not encountered this, including a lot of people who are highly connected to actual play in different kinds of ways, either as audience members or not. So more information needed. There is also a story of a Singapore dungeon master who his players had not watched Critical Role. And so he basically railroaded them through campaign 2 of Critical Role for quite some time before one of them watched the show and realized, wait, what's happening to us? The TTRPG researcher Kellen Wee told me that story, and I was like, "Oh wow, that's a new one." But yeah, I mean, I don't think there. Also, I'm also of the belief that like that really Critical Role is often brought up as the example of this is unrealistic, and it's like, no, that is anyone who is actually watching Critical Role knows that is extremely realistic. They never make a decision. They spend hours and hours debating what they're going to do. Are they doing it with entertaining voices? Sure, but like that's very much my home game experience.
I mean, that's always an added bonus.
I've seen a lot of dungeon masters mainly, just beating themselves up, trying to sound like Mac Master, like the voices, the narration, and all that. Myself included. At the beginning, even I was like that.
And I will say, I think and I think that is real, right? Like that is that kind of anxiety of influence, like of how can I be more like the dungeon master that I watch, who I
Mm,
think is really
Exactly.
cool. I think that's real. And I say this with a lot of, I mean, Matt is a friend of mine. And I uh, like his work a great deal, but I think the other thing that we have to remember is like, he's not perfect either. He has skill sets that he's particularly good at with NPCs and some interesting world building. What we're seeing right now is like plot is not his thing, right? He is a extremely deferent dungeon master to his players, and he wants his players to have everything they want. And sometimes that actually isn't something that works to the satisfaction even of the players. And I think I'm always, what I'm struck by is, I was thinking about this Matt Mercer effect, and Quinn's had just done his first kind of actual play as Quinn's Quest, this one shot, and I was reading the comments because I was curious as to how it was going to go over, because I helped consult on it. And that is a game that's very intentionally Quentin Smith playing with people who he plays with at home. They're in front of a camera, but like he is trying his damnedest, and said to me, this is how I would run it at home, aside from the fact that I wrote an introduction, which I would not normally
mm,
do at home. And still there was someone in the comments who was like, I could never do this. It's nice to watch, but I could never do this with my players. And it's like, then there's no hope, right? It's the act of being recorded makes people just
mm.
self-conscious about what they're
Yeah.
watching, right? Which is a bummer, right? Because what people like Matt and Quinn's and Brennan Lee Mulligan and all those folks are trying to do is to get people excited about the possibilities of the hobby and excited about the possibilities of DMing. But as someone who does not like being a DM, I am not a forever DM. I am not that person. Um, that means I don't run D&D a whole lot unless I have to. I play in a home game. I'm very good at taking the notes.
Hmm.
But if I have the choice and I'm facilitating and we're at my house, we're looking at the games that have either GM lists or are very low facilitation, like fly by the seat of your pants kind of stuff. Because I don't want that pressure either. And what we don't say enough is like, you don't have to be the greatest dungeon master if there's no dungeon master needed at the table, right? Dialect doesn't have
Fair
a
enough.
dungeon master. This game we started talking about, you know,
Wander home.
um, Alice, Wander Home, Alice is Missing, For the Queen, Yazeba's my go-to starter game for converting people to what TTRPGs are. All of those, you got to have somebody who can get the ball rolling, but like once it's rolling, you're good to go. Um, and even I would say even games like Slug Blaster, I mean they require more of a game master, but like less prep. Goodness
Hmm.
knows.
Oh,
Um,
I want to try Slug Blaster so much. I've heard so many good things about it. I have it. I have a PDF of it, but I haven't found anyone to play with yet.
We
Uh,
literally are in a tavern full of around 500 people.
oh,
What
my
do you
bad.
mean you haven't found
I
anyone?
haven't found the time because I'm too busy editing the Infinite Tavern podcast.
no, that we do not talk enough about how actual play is really about the editing, unless you're Critical Role.
It is
Um,
so much, and like we have a actual play going on right now. It's only audio only, which is DM'd by Purna. I think by the time this comes out, all of the episodes have been must be on Spotify, and yeah, editing is such a huge deal. Unless I think even with Critical Role, the prep that goes into, because they have a full production crew with them, with the lighting, with the sounds, their projection screens which are behind them. So obviously there's a lot of practical effects going on. But yeah, tons of editing. uh, I think same with Dimension 20. Like a lot of editing is required, and that's slept on, I feel. The work that
Yeah, I
goes.
mean, Dimension 20, things like Worlds Beyond Number, things like that are very much testimonies to the power of editing, um to and that editing look, you know, the best editing always looks like you didn't do anything, right?
Mhm.
Because it should be invisible. It's removing the things that are. I've been thinking a lot in terms of, because I'm a book historian, we have ideas in scholarly editing of substantives and accidentals. So when you're comparing editions and you're trying to make a new edition of something, what are the variations between these different versions of the text of the novel or what have you that make a difference, and those are substantives, and which are like a typo or like a difference in spacing or things like that, and those are accidentals. And I think a lot of editing of actual play is trying to decide on a case by case basis what is an accidental, like what is the stuff that doesn't matter to the audience versus what are the substantive things, and everybody's making different decisions about that.
Yeah.
um and different audiences, you know, one person wants all the roles left in, and God bless them, and other people are like, no, no, it's fine. I don't need to hear every single, you
Rules
know
clarification.
bunch of yeah, rules lookup. No one needs a rules lookup unless we're doing pedagogical play, right? Unless we're
Mhm.
trying to teach. In which
Yeah.
case, then we're doing something else, and then maybe we're adding on a interpretive layer, like, um, kind of something like, what Matt Colville almost did and then backed away from. No one really has tried to like do an editing layer that's like kind of like a pop-up video, or like, cut to commentary from somebody
Mhm.
saying, oh, and this is why I did what I did as a dungeon master, or this is what I did because of a player, that kind of thing.
I think
um
that would.
and I don't know that it would
That's an
work because
idea.
I don't know that's what people want, but
Maybe for a one shot. I mean, like, it's worth giving it a shot, honestly, to see how it would be received and how it
yeah,
would work.
I'm really hoping that we are, you know it's so interesting to me to think about the ways in which actual play, which is a thing that has existed online for almost 2 decades at this point, um, is kind of in constant flux. And we had a huge expansion in 2020, and that has started to kind of recede as people kind of burn out and things like that, because a lot of folks freighted their labor in actual play as if it could like lead to something else.
Hmm.
And sometimes it has, and many times it hasn't. The making itself has to be worth it in some way, shape, or form. And what's been cool about the research I've done is like getting to talk to people for whom like the making is the fun part. Um, but yeah, I'm really hoping that we are coming to a place of kind of thinking like, oh, hey, this is an experiment worth trying out. Or like, this is me thinking about what actual play can be, and uh I want to try this out because I don't see it happening. Um, you know, we'll see.
So,
Uh,
so one of the games I talk about constantly on this podcast and with other people is God Killer by Connie Chung.
mm,
And the way they do their actual plays, and even Blackwater D&D, whom we had as a guest before you. So whenever they're playing God Killer, whenever the God Killer has to do a move, the GM tells, okay, so you're doing a mortal move, on answer this question, and the GM will answer the other. And so it's almost like, clarifying the rules every time. And that's how
mm,
I actually learned the game. The actual play was interesting. It was visually, orally, everything. It was beautiful. But as they're playing, it's a quick rules thing. Okay, when you do this mortal move, you have to answer this question, and the GM will answer the other. Or if you're doing this God Killer move, you have to roll on a 7 to 9, you get this. On a 8, on above a 9, you get this. it's a very simple, like it barely takes 30 seconds for
Right.
them to say it. But whenever they're doing a move, it's always like feeding into the brain, like, oh, that's how you do it, and you're
Yeah, I
getting
mean, and
instant
it's
education out
interesting.
of it.
Yeah, it's interesting that like when Connie and C filmed their studio version of God Killer,
Mhm.
which is their first studio actual play, like that they leaned out from that in ways like, so if Blackwater is like kind of leaning into kind of some of the framing of the rules, then we
Mhm.
get this other version that's, no, we're just turning this into kind of black box theater in different kinds of ways, which I think is quite interesting. It's also interesting to see this kind of bloom and proliferation of God Killer actual play by some pretty influential folks in the space before Evil Hat even has a chance to get it out, out the door. Obviously, there's the ash can floating around, but it's still it's kind of, it reminds me a little bit of the way in which we saw a lot of Yazeba's actual play before Yazeba's came out, and then not so much anymore. It's always interesting to me to see the kind of life cycle of when does a system get kind of explored in those kinds of ways,
Mhm.
and kind of, are there fashions and vogues, and also of course like for some systems, especially like if you're talking about something bigger like Star Trek Adventure Second Edition or the Discworld game or things along those lines, then you're talking about um the element of sponsored games, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm really interested in is like when organically like a kind of a collective of folks are just like, oh no, this is the kind of story that I want to tell, or this is the kind of mechanics I want to explore, and that kind of thing, which I think is interesting. We are in such an interesting time in terms of thinking about deities, especially
Yeah.
as Critical Role thinks about killing the gods themselves. Um, but that, and it's so interesting to see like the limitations of different players in that respect, right? If you have no way of thinking about meaningful polytheism, you get stuck real hard by D&D, because D&D is like this weird amalgamation, right? It's written by kind of monotheists, but it's pantheist, and it's all a mess, right? And this is where, designers like Connie can bring these kinds of alternate ways of framing and thinking, but then they come up against players who may or may not know what the heck they're doing, which I also
Fair.
find really interesting.
Like I'm also doing God Killer actual play, and I'm actually doing it in 5 languages. Like I'm not doing it in 5 languages. I have other GMs in my team who are GMing with other players in their native language. So we have Spanish, Mandarin, and French actual plays
Oh,
going out.
cool.
Uh, and then like a one through line of me doing in English in Hindi. Definitely a very hard left turn from what we were talking about to what
Yeah.
Anarak is now going to talk about. What we found out today, what he found out, and he sent me,
Ooh.
and it, uh,
I was just doom scrolling on Instagram when I
Oh
found
boy.
this. One of the reels explains about this, a list of 1,500 games from Steam, a live spreadsheet that keeps automatically updating, and the title is "Woke Content Detector's Curated List of Games," and it has a list of games that they would recommend and not recommend, or optional stuff based on the content that is there. And one of the funniest thing that I've seen was for Wolfenstein. It's an action game,
Yes.
first person shooter,
Yes.
and the person says it is not recommended because again it has a lot. He says it's a lot of woke content because the protagonist was apparently rescued by his pregnant girlfriend.
And what does it also say it has DEI content?
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Good grief.
Uh, if you, I sent it to Leona, and her reply was, "Oh my god, this is so horrible. It's almost funny." I mean,
Kind of
I
like
definitely.
Fatal,
Hmm.
but not actually that funny.
Yeah. It's almost funny. Not really.
Yeah.
Almost. I
Uh,
mean, especially right now around watching things fall around here. I'll tell you that yeah,
mm,
it might have been funnier a few weeks ago or months ago.
fair enough. Yeah. Our condolences.
Thank you. Your thoughts and prayers in this time that we hope will somehow survive all of us.
Inshallah.
Uh,
uh,
indeed.
So you've read a lot of fictional books. So what is that one fictional place that you would prefer to live in? Like,
I've been thinking a lot about the world building of Lois McMaster Bujold, who her Vorkosigan series imagines a kind of future that is doing some really interesting things with what if humans go out into the stars, kind of settle on a bunch of different planets, and then one of those planets becomes isolated for several centuries with minimal technology, and basically they become like, and then a new wormhole appears, and all of a sudden the rest of the kind of universe of humans has to reckon with the fact that there's basically like Regency Klingons now. Which I think is really interesting. What Bujold does with thinking about kind of culture clash and reproduction and gender and things like that. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination or utopian, but it would be very interesting for sure. And certainly it's I find it a really kind of interesting place to mentally spend time in. For all its faults, I find myself thinking a lot about, especially as I become a visible person on the internet, the distinction that Bujold has a character draw between reputation, which is what other people know about you, and honor, which is what you know about yourself. And only one of those matters. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's
and
where
I
I
like,
am at the moment.
what about you? Which world?
okay, I know I might have said Lord of the Rings, like Middle Earth, but now that I think about it, I'd say House in the Cerulean Sea.
That's good. That's a good
Hmm.
choice.
You've read that? Have you read that book, Emily?
I
House in the
haven't, but I've
Cerulean Sea
heard
by.
very good things from my colleagues about it.
Oh, I would describe it as a literary hug. You just feel like you're getting hugged when you're reading that book. And I've recently read its sequel as well.
Amazing.
Amazing work. Amazing work. It's such a warm-hearted book. It has such unique magic in it. It's just awesome. Yeah, that's what I would say.
I'm gonna live on Duskworld. I am not making it out of there. I don't know if I'm gonna see it the other day, but we're gonna toss the coin, roll the dice, and see what's gonna happen on
Sure.
that plane. Uh, but talking about our favorite worlds, Emily, we have a final question for you.
Mhm.
Emily, what has been what has been the most favorite moment in TTRPG for you so far?
Ah,
Could be a moment you were
so
part of, could be a moment you witnessed, anything.
yeah. Um, so after I finish the actual playbook, I'm writing a book. The working title I think might stick, although it's been used many times by other people in other fields, called Home Game. Because there's a game that I didn't get out of my head until I wrote an essay about it. Um, but I think so. I have been part of a playtest of Jay Dragon, who co-created Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast. Jay is now designing a game about basically the opposite of Yazeba's 7-part pact is oops, all DMs. Everyone's the game master of some part of the world, and you're all evil wizards who are trying to keep the delicate balance of the world of Isha together. And it's a really interesting meditation on power and toxic masculinity and all kinds of things. But one of my favorite things to witness at the table, or really the group of couches that we were all at 2:00 in the morning, as I'm watching two players in a wizard's duel, kind of a shapeshifters duel, kind of going back and forth from the concrete to the existential and conceptual. It was nail biting. It was somehow very terrifying. It was a really satisfying moment of what role playing can be without a single dice roll. And at one point we looked at each other like, how does this end? And then we got to a moment where we all kind of collectively understood this is the end. This is how the duel ends, it lives in my head rent free, as they say.
So, Emily, before we close this off, would you like to plug in yourself, your work? Where can we find you?
Sure. I own my little corner of the internet at ecfriedman.com. And so you can always find me there and how to get in touch with me. I am the German word for peace, Friede, on most socials. Like a lot of TTRPG folks, I spend most of my time on Blue Sky. My YouTube channel and my Instagram are both Critical Prof for my TTRPG work. And of course, you can find me as M. Friedman on Polygon. I'm not pitching much these days as I work on the books, so many books. But every once in a while, Charlie Hall pulls me back in with an offer I can't refuse. Most recently, a kind of brief introduction to the kind of precursor to actual play, which is people performing role-playing games in person for audiences. So please get in touch if you have any memories of watching people play in person, because those would be incredibly helpful. That is an understudied part of the field. It's really hard. It's beyond the scope of the book, but I'm hoping to kind of start to collect some more examples of that.
And for all of you who are watching this podcast on YouTube, consider subscribing, liking, commenting. If you do, Anarak is going to give you a die of inspiration for that in his own game, which is running too many of these days. And if you're listening on Spotify, please give us a good rating and comment if you will, because that helps the good old gods of algorithms that exist in all places. And we'll be back next time around with the letter G, and our guests are so until the next time.
Spoiler alert.
Hey, it's fine. It's promoting, that hey, keep watching, we have to do a bit more of that. Creative Award number 2, let's go.
Yeah, let's go.
All right, until the next time, may all your roles be great.